What's up, everybody? This is Brian Davidson, and you are listening to the NIL Spotlight podcast brought to you by NIL Game Plan, your number one source for NIL news and, more importantly, education across all collegiate sports. Let's get after it. Jeremy Evans is the founder and managing attorney of California Sports Lawyer, where he focuses on sports, entertainment, media, and IP law. He's also the host of the California Sports Lawyer podcast, bringing a legal and industry perspective to the biggest issues shaping sports and creator deals today. Jeremy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Brian, an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to start things off, I was hoping you could give the audience a little bit of a backstory on your background, how you got into sports, and your interest in NIL.
Yeah, no, thanks again for having me, and always a terrific topic, and love to have these conversations. So for me, I grew up in a large family, youngest of 9 kids, and I've got 75 nephews and nieces now, and I think another 15 great nephews and nieces, and growing. So big family. My dad was a salesman, furniture salesman, and then my mom was a nurse. Didn't, I think most of my mentors in terms of obviously learned values and those things from my parents, which were very important. But when it came to lawyers and the professional industries, that was mostly from what I saw on TV, honestly, or people that I met in the community. And so from a very early age, I had an interest in the law and an interest in politics. And I think for me, Law and Order was like an impactful show for me. So I
Sure.
grew up thinking I wanted to be a DA.
My wife's favorite.
Yeah, exactly. And so long story short, I basically went to law school with that in mind. But I think eventually what happened was, as I got more experience and worked for the public defender for almost 3 years as an intern, and then worked for the court as a graduate law clerk for a year, worked for other law firms, civil, criminal, basically did all of it. And what I found was that I really didn't want to pursue any of those professions. And I had a really impactful event that happened where I got the opportunity to travel to Tulane Law School down in New Orleans and competed in a baseball arbitration competition. And it sounds nerdy, and it is, but for people who love baseball and love numbers, it was exciting. But I realized a few things at that conference, and one was that I had a true passion, sort of re-engaged with my passion for sports and entertainment. I grew up in and around Hollywood, did some plays as a kid, played baseball, played other sports, really enjoyed it. And so I thought, I wonder if there's a way where I can combine what I'm passionate about with what I'm good at. And what I found that I was good at was negotiating contracts, drafting contracts, deal making, building things, putting things together, being very entrepreneurial. So I think eventually, through different relationships and experiences, as soon as I graduated law school, I was convinced, and once I got licensed, I was convinced that I want to start my own practice. And then, obviously, if I'm going to practice law, that's a difficult enough profession as it is. I thought I might as well do what I like, which was sports entertainment. And so I launched my practice, almost 14 years ago, a California Sports Lawyer, where I do entertainment and sports, transactional work. And it's sort of been that way ever since. It was probably very naive for me to do that, but I think ultimately it's worked out. And I think sometimes being naive is a great benefit for an entrepreneur, because you don't know what you're going up against until you get there. And I think different circumstances will help you prepare for those things when they come along.
You certainly don't know what you don't know. Well, in a recent episode, you talked about the need for representation and proper representation, and representation that doesn't necessarily go with just an agent, but beyond an agent. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to our audience?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And this is something that I think we live in an age where we have more access to information than we've ever had. And I think within that context, we need to be wise about where we spend our time, how we spend it, because it's really the only resource we can't increase, right? You sort of have a
Sure.
limited time. And so I think that you need to be doing it, spending it in the sense of learning and trying to find sort of the best way to utilize your time. And what my hope for athletes and entertainers sort of going forward is that they would look at representation as a team and as skill sets. So instead of just blindly saying, I need an agent, and then just have the agent take a percentage of whatever money comes in, I think the athlete and the entertainer and anybody who has talent or needs representation would look at it as more of a holistic point of view, meaning you're probably going to need a financial advisor, an accountant, a tax lawyer, a business lawyer, a litigation attorney, and somebody that can help you with what projects you choose to do. Probably gonna need somebody to help you with your workouts, right? I guess my point is that instead of looking at it as, I just need an agent to do all these deals for me, I think people need to get smart about who's representing them, where money is going, and how they're spending money. So I think that was my point about the full representation. And I think, unfortunately, what I see a lot in this space is people just saying, I'm just going to hire an agent or I need an agent to do this or that. Now, it is true that in some contexts, you need an agent to broker a deal because the Players Association requires some certification. But oftentimes, those agents are consulting with lawyers and helping, and lawyers are helping to broker those deals. And oftentimes, the agents are lawyers themselves or went to law school and got legal education. So, my point is just people need to be smart and they need to do their research and they need to care about who's representing them and where their money is going.
Speaking of smart and doing that research, when do you think that should begin? Obviously, with NIL now bleeding into actual high school sports, it's happening earlier than ever. When do families need to start thinking about putting together a team, starting that educational path, learning about both the opportunities as well as the potential pitfalls?
Yeah, no, good question. And I think it starts in the home. I think it starts with the parents and the family members. And I think that that is truly the best place to start. And if you have good parents that are around and can provide good advice, or at least the parents might know people that could help or get good advice, I think that's a good place. I also think, again, we live in a time and an age where we have more access to information than we've ever had. So whether that's through reading books or audiobooks on Spotify or podcast or whatever research you do, I think we also have more access to people than we've ever had. So there really shouldn't be an excuse of I couldn't get a hold of somebody or I couldn't find good representation. Really, it just starts with a simple Google search and then you sort of drill down your research from there. But I think this should start very early, but within reason, right? If you
Sure.
talk to most parents, particularly in the entertainment space or the sports space, the often time that I feel parents are making a mistake and is when the point when it's like they're pushing too hard for their children to do one thing or another, or they're not allowing sort of that creative aspect to be developed, or they're putting their kids in situations that they shouldn't be putting them in, to where maybe safety is a question, or they're not protecting for their future. So what
Sure.
is that? That means that parents should be wary about putting their kid on every travel team that's out there or traveling around to every sport. Or, at the end of the day, if the kid is talented, talent managers and scouts will find it 100%. Between social media and YouTube and word of mouth, clearly talent will get noticed, right? So I think it needs to start early, but I think the parents need to be involved. And I think the schools can probably play a part too. But yeah, that would be my advice.
Diving into things from a more of a legal perspective. For high school athletes and their families entering the NIL space early, what practical advice would you give them about avoiding common legal pitfalls around eligibility, family involvement, sponsored deals, and just all around recruitment and eligibility issues?
Sure. I think a lot of times what needs to happen is there needs to be good communication between what deal is being offered, when and where, what are the terms and conditions. This is where I think a lawyer can play an essential part. I also think that in any of these stages, you need to be involving the institution that's involved, whether that be the high school or the college or whatever it might be, or the team that they're playing for. I think anytime you're trying to hide certain details, that's when you get into problems, right? So I think for me, things need to be on the up and up. Things need to be paper, meaning there needs to be a written contract in play. And I think there needs to be proper disclosures. People need to know what they're getting into and why. So that would be my advice.
And around that, what kind of core clauses or protections should a typical NIL agreement include?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this day and age, a lot of the NIL agreements are going to be pretty standardized,
Sure.
people are probably using ChatGPT and other resources to get these agreements. I think if anything, too, you can Google search and find sample agreements online. I'm not saying that's the best pathway forward. I'm just saying realistically, that's what's happening. Ideally, somebody's going to hire a lawyer to help draft or at least review the deal. But to me, I think number one is how much are you getting paid? How are you getting paid? When are you getting paid? Second would be what do you have to do for the money? Are you posting on social media? Are you making appearances? I think the next thing is probably how long does this deal last for? How long is the license for to use these images? I think that those three things are top of mind. I think the standard clauses of indemnification probably need to be in there, some sort of arbitration clause, but those would be sort of the highlights for me.
Sure. What do parents need to know about a state level perspective as NIL laws are changing on a state by state basis?
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing that's going to be very tough, right? I mean, depending on what state you're in, a lawyer is generally going to be licensed in one state or maybe a few. There's some that are licensed in many. But for like a lawyer like me, I'm licensed in California. So I'm going to be knowledgeable about California. That being said, I think you need to talk with people who are competent specifically in the subject matter of where you live. I think oftentimes the schools will be familiar with these things. So again, it goes back to the point that you need to have good representation that's local to you or at least familiar with your state laws. You need to have somebody that's in communication with the school to understand what's going on there and what sort of liabilities or issues are at hand. But I think as long as you have those sort of avenues covered, I think you're going to be in a pretty good spot.
On a recent episode, you talked about the rising price of just doing NIL business and its economic impact on the actual university as well as their programs. Where do you see that going in the future? Do you foresee a place where smaller programs are actually dropping out of potentially Division One? Does Division One itself need to change? What sort of structural changes or policy solutions do you see happening in the near future here?
No, good question, Brian. And I would tell you that I think that there probably needs to be some level of a commissioner model that's introduced.
Sure.
Um, spoke about this recently on a podcast and also wrote about it recently in a column. I think that the current structure is untenable. There's no way that it could survive because I think that what you're going to see, first of all, from just a roster management standpoint, college coaches, particularly in basketball, cannot survive having to go through a point where 50% of the eligible players are entering the transfer portal. That's just not sustainable. And it's not great for smaller schools because essentially talent is being developed and then being wiped out to go somewhere else. And in many ways, these smaller schools are becoming minor leagues for the bigger schools. And that's not great. You lose this sort of idea of Cinderella teams and what really makes, I think, sports great is parity, meaning you
Hmm.
want evenness amongst the leagues and the teams and what have you. So I think the transfer portal needs to be adjusted. And I don't think athletes should have more rights than academic students that are focused just on academics as opposed to sports and academics. I think for me, if you can transfer generally once during your college career with the idea that you're attending your trying to graduate, I don't think athletes should have more than one of those opportunities. I think it also forces people to deal with adversity. If you're not getting along with your coach, okay, you can transfer once. But it doesn't mean you can transfer every year, right? So I think that needs to be adjusted. I also think the payments need to be adjusted, meaning I'm not necessarily saying there needs to be a salary cap or some sort of luxury tax, but there needs to be some semblance of what do these conferences look like and who is in control, who's reviewing these deals. And I think this is where a centralized sort of commissioner that has some actual power with rules that everybody has to follow is the right way to go about it. And I think until that point happens, we're going to sort of have this Wild West occurring.
And how do you see the path to get there?
I think ultimately Congress probably is going to have to pass some level of antitrust exemption to make this work. Otherwise, you're going to have litigation over Title IX, which is a major issue. Then you're going to have litigation over employment status moving towards unionization. And then you have potential for antitrust litigation related to The fact that these leagues and teams are coming together, conferences, if you will, and price fixing or sort of saying what can and cannot happen. Those are all not great circumstances. So I think there needs to be some level of limited antitrust exemption for college. Because what people forget is that this is still college. People are still getting an education. And it's not just the athletes that are affected by this. It's the non-revenue producing sports, one, but two, it's the regular academics because a lot of the money that's raised in these major sports goes back to the individual teams or the individual institutions for scholarships or for research. So I think people need to keep that in mind. I think secondly, there needs to be a commissioner over basically the Power Four, Power Five conferences or whoever decides to get involved. And inevitably, there's going to be schools that say, I don't want to compete in that. I don't want to have a major football program. And maybe they never had a great football program. That probably makes sense. I think the schools that could potentially really be hurt by not making changes are the ones that do have good basketball or football programs that are profitable and it is helping the university. And if nothing has changed, it's similar to there was a quote by Rick Pitino when he was talking about his time coaching at Iona University. And after he was very successful with them for the seasons he was with them, ultimately when he left the team, that entire league or conference was gutted for players. So that ideally is not what you want to happen. So I think the two-step process is some level of antitrust exemption because we're dealing with academics. And then second is some level of a commissioner that oversees all of the participating universities.
You mentioned Title IX, and you also mentioned non-revenue sports. How do you see NIL affecting them? Do they have opportunity in NIL, or is NIL ultimately hurting them?
Well, I think that NIL has the potential to help fund other parts of the university, meaning that if you're bringing in money through television dollars and that sort of thing, it probably helps the university through research, through scholarships, that sort of thing. I don't think NIL on an individual level is helping anybody other than the individual athlete. But I think within that, some of the problems that have been created by NIL, which were not, I think, anticipated initially with the Pay to Play Act in California, which initially set out that athletes could make money in an open market system based on them posting on social media or doing some endorsement activity. That's initially what NIL was supposed to be. And the schools were not to be involved. Now what's happened is the schools are paying the athletes directly. And that to me creates problems with employment and union status. It creates problems with Title IX. So again, until there's some level of organization, there's going to be continued problems in that space.
Today's episode is sponsored by NIL Game Plan. NIL Game Plan helps student athletes and their families navigate the world of NIL with confidence. From building a personal brand and creating content to understanding financial opportunities and planning for the future, NIL Game Plan provides practical tools and guidance every step of the way. What sets NIL Game Plan apart is that it's designed specifically for middle school, high school, and college student athletes, making NIL education accessible, simple, and actionable no matter where they are in their journey. So whether you're just getting started or already growing your brand, NIL Game Plan helps you take control and protect your future. And the best part, you can get started for free today at nilgameplan.com. Big thanks to NIL Game Plan for sponsoring today's episode.
You mentioned the California law. Specifically, how do you see other states responding? Do you think they'll be passing their own legislation? Do you have an opinion on which way they should go and how they should shape things? Or should they really sit back and wait for Congress to step in?
I think the states are going to continue to move the way that they feel is proper, which has been the case, I think, from day one. I think they felt Congress was taking too long. And frankly, contractual law should be state based, not federally based, right? The federal government is supposed to be limited in its powers. And the states really do have states' rights through the Constitution and really in through effect as well. And so I think that the states will continue to do what they need to do to protect their athletes. And frankly, they want to compete. So if one state does one thing, another state might do something like make NIL money untaxable. Do I think those policies are good? I think there's probably arguments for and against. Maybe it's great for the athlete, but maybe it's not great for the state's tax revenue. But then again, it's like maybe the state should be more responsible in how they spend money. So I think there's arguments in all of that. But I think at the end of the day, unless there's some level of antitrust exemption and some overall commissioner over sports, there's going to be these continued problems, because you're going to have issues with Title IX and issues with employment and labor sort of status, and issues with competitive sort of universities and how this looks. I don't think it's right that athletes in college are taking a pay cut when they go to the NFL or the NBA. That to me doesn't make any sense. So whatever it takes to, sort of streamline that or make it more even across the board. And I think you do that through having deals to be approved or what have you, having rules set in place and actual authority for a commissioner to do things, should something be done improperly. Look, if I had my druthers about me and I could if I was commissioner or if I could go back in time, I would have said NIL is great insofar it is separate from the university, meaning the university cannot be involved. They cannot be the person paying the player. It has to be done through individual market deals, which, by the way, would not have offended employment law, Title IX, or any antitrust issues. But I think, unfortunately, the university saw an opportunity to use money through collectives to then pay the players to get a competitive advantage. And maybe that was foreseeable, maybe it wasn't. But I think now that we're already in this space, I think it's hard to go back on that unless legislatures said that the schools can't be involved and change the legislation to do that. But I think if that's not the case, then it has to be some level of a commissioner with some antitrust exemption.
Well, the opposite of going back is NIL creeping into high school. What legal issues or eligibility concerns arise?
Well, I think this is the one thing where universities are going to have to be very careful, because if you're in high school and you're making money, is there a potential issue when you go to college? Could that potentially be considered pro, that you've already made money? I haven't heard of this case yet, but there's a potential issue might come up in the future. So we'll see with that. But I think, again, this is where working, as you asked before, and we sort of talked about before, it's this idea of who are you working with? Who's your representation? Are you communicating with the schools? I think at the end of the day, trying to hide money is not a great thing, right? So I think if you're trying to make money or making money in high school, you need to be clear that that money being made is not going to affect your eligibility. And the quickest way to find that out is to ask the school directly or to hire somebody who understands that.
Well, this has been wonderful. Let's end on this note. What do you think the next page to turn is legally? What is the next big issue in NIL?
That's such a good question. And I think this really turns on are the college teams and the NCAA going to take responsibility and try to organize this themselves? Or are they going to be forced to do it through the legal system? And so far, it's been the latter. NCAA has lost every major case that's happened so far. So I think that they really have a decision to make. We're either going to organize this and make it fair and equitable, or we're not. And it's going to continue to go down the path that it's going, which maybe not be the best for the students and the athletes long term or the universities. But I think within that, if they decide to manage this, there needs to be that two-part approach. Some level of an antitrust exemption, so it deals with these antitrust issues, it deals with labor and employment, and it deals with Title IX. And they have some level of commissioner overseeing this that has some power to enforce rules. And all these rules would be rules that the universities agree to. So that to me would be the best option, but that's yet to be seen.
Well, Jeremy, this has been great. Where can we send people to find you?
Thank you. Oh, yes. That's easy. Google California sports lawyer or just go to csllegal.com. Everything's on there, from social media to phone number to email. So yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the NIL Spotlight podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to visit nilgameplan.com to get started on your NIL journey for free. We'll see you next week.